Let me just say that I would just underline here again the valuable contributions we've made, the excellent work that was done, and two commitments I can take in specific terms. One, of making sure that we coordinate the internal and the external work on human rights in all our policies. Second, that we manage to try to mainstream this across all sectors of our engagement, in particular when we work with our third parties around the world, and the commitment to work together, different institutions, Council, Commission, but very much with the European Parliament. And I would like to thank very much all of you for the contributions to the debate, to the shadow rapporteurs and to the rapporteur, to Antonio Panzeri, for the excellent report that will constitute the basis for our future work very much in these critical times, together with Stavros Lambrinidis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam High Commissioner, and also would like to give the floor to Mr. Panzeri as a reporter in 2 minutes.
Thank you all for this debate, and I'd also like to thank you, High Representative, for your focus on what it is useful to do. I think it is important to take a different approach. We may not agree on everything. In the preamble to the Charter of Fundamental Rights, it does say that the EU puts people at the heart of its policy. That should not be an abstract term. The word people is actually about moving away from the abstract subjects, individuals, etc. We need to look at real human lives, real conditions, and the inviolable nature of fundamental human rights. I've heard some shameful remarks from Mr. Bay and Shobrad about the LGBT community, and this shows the extent to which there is not a sense of civic duty and respect in political life sometimes. And I have to say that I'm afraid I wasn't entirely surprised, because we have got used to intolerance from some quarters. The GUE and Madame VERGIAT, I think, should also take account of the fact that there could be a paradox here. There is a danger of going back in time. I think we have made achievements, and I very much hope that there will be a broad consensus across most of this Parliament, at least. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Panzeri, for your closing thoughts. Now I close the debate. We will be voting tomorrow. And now let us move to another important and difficult debate following the agenda, which will be a statement about the unstable situation in Libya and its consequences. And I would like to give the floor to the High Representative. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. Libya has been the first point I've put on the agenda of Foreign Ministers' meeting last Friday and Saturday in Riga, in the very north and east of our European Union, to show very clearly that as we are united when we look to the challenges we have and threats we have at our east, we do the same with the challenges and the threats we have at our south. Because the threats that we are facing coming out of Libya in these weeks, more than in all the past months and years, are threats not only for the southern countries of our European Union, but are threats and challenges for all the European Union itself. And since we discussed in this hemicycle the situation in Libya last January, since then This has been, I would say, the top priority, together with the Ukrainian crisis, of my personal work. A work that has been difficult, that is still very much difficult, made of creating the network of international and regional support for the efforts to support and to have political dialogue under the UN auspices in the dialogue that is in these days ongoing in Rabat under the work of the UN Secretary General Special Envoy Bernardino Leon. I have started to work on this international and regional framework a few weeks ago when, in Washington, the European Union has promoted a meeting between the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, myself for the European Union, Secretary Kerry and Shukri, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, to try and build a framework that could keep all relevant actors, there are many others as well, involved on a bilateral basis, but main political actors, main relevant actors together in full support of the internal dialogue in Libya. And since January, that dialogue has restarted. Has restarted in Rabat in these days. I was in a session of one of these dialogues before, just exactly today, 4 months ago, in Tripoli. I was in the same Hotel Corinthia that was then attacked by a terrorist act in the end of January, together with not only Bernardino Leon but with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, in one of the sessions, one of the last sessions of the dialogue before we restarted a couple of days ago. And I can say that the fact that the dialogue has restarted is something on which just a few months ago we would not have bet, probably. And this is the result of sometimes silent but constant and difficult diplomatic work we have done together with the UN in an incredible way in these months. Now, the European Union supports not only politically this dialogue, also financially. There are other tracks of dialogue going on. They sometimes don't make the headlines of the news, but I think it is fair for this chamber to know and to recognise the work that is done also on parallel levels. There is currently a dialogue going on in Algeria of political parties. There has been on Monday, so a few days ago in Brussels, a meeting of more than 40 businessmen coming from all different parts of Libya, coming up with a joint statement asking for the political dialogue to bring the result of a national unity government so that they can be put in the situation of restarting the reconstruction of their country and the improvement of the economic and social situation of the Libyan people, of all the Libyan people, united. And we will host in the European Union institutions in Brussels in the coming days a dialogue of municipalities and mayors to accompany with the grassroots local level dialogue the political dialogue that is taking place hopefully in Rabat again in these days. And I have talked to Bernardino Leon today about the state of play of this political dialogue. We've been discussing that also with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon Monday in New York, and this morning again with the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, and I will have a conversation later today with the Egyptian Foreign Minister. This to say that we need to make sure that all actors are pushing in the same direction. I forgot to say, but that was not out of a political intention, this has been also a subject of my meeting with the Turkish Foreign Minister a few days ago in Riga. We have to make sure that all relevant international, regional and local actors, local level, national level, push in the same direction. We have to make sure that the dialogue continues, and we have to make sure that the dialogue brings the result of a national unity government. Terrorism, confronting the threat of Daesh, uncontrolled migration, regional instability, These are only some of the challenges we have in front of us in Libya, and the unity government in Libya is vital for addressing all these issues and many more. Libya is a rich country full of financial, natural resources that, if put together, if provided with authorities, can very well perform. What we need to do is to assure that there is a restart, a reset somehow, that allows a government to be in place that can work on all the territory and with all the people of Libya. It will be vital for addressing these challenges. It will be vital, first of all, for giving all Libyans the security and the living conditions that their country can offer and that they deserve after so many difficult years. But as I've said, these are not only Libyan problems. They concern all of us, and the international community must contribute in all possible ways and as a matter of urgency to solve these problems. Here, continued strong cooperation between the UN and the EU is crucial, as well as it is crucial, as I said, our cooperation with the neighbouring countries of Libya and the League of Arab States. We need a unified and effective state authority all over Libya, and I think that the national unity government is possible and desperately needed for the country and for the sake of the country. Now, the European Union is ready, with all its willingness and its support, to help this process. We are doing that already. In the moment when we will have, and I hope it will be soon, a positive outcome of the dialogue, we are ready to support in all possible ways, in coordination with the UN and with the neighbouring countries, including missions and operations that are being explored in these days. We discussed this. We started to discuss this with the Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Riga a couple of days ago. Libya will be one of the main issues on our agenda on Monday at the Foreign Affairs Council, to make sure that the European Union is ready to support any kind of outcome of the dialogue that is currently taking place. As well as we will work with the ministers on Monday on migration. And talking about Libya, it is impossible not to mention this issue. It is impossible, first of all, because the number of people that are crossing the Mediterranean through Libya, not from Libya, it's not Libyans, these are people coming from the Horn of Africa, coming from Syria, escaping from terrible situations in their own countries. People that are crossing the Mediterranean are increasing in numbers compared to the same months last year, and even more so probably when spring and summer comes. And it's not only an issue of people crossing the Mediterranean, it's also an issue that affects the neighbouring countries of Libya very much so. Tunisia, Chad, Algeria, Niger, Sudan and Egypt continue to receive migrants and asylum seekers from Libya. And the EU is supporting organisations like the IOM, which are trying to carry out voluntary repatriation. A few days ago, through one of the EU-funded programmes, IOM facilitated the voluntary return of 400 Senegalese from Libya, and these are 400 people that will not try to cross the Mediterranean, risking their lives, feeding terrorist networks probably with financial revenues that are through the criminal organisations, most probably also supporting criminal activities. And these are 400 people saved, most probably. In the same way, we are working with the UNHCR, and according to them, there are around 400,000 internally displaced persons in Libya. This is almost 10% of the country's population. They are moving along tribal lines, seeking safety in rural areas, and the tendency is to remain in Libya, trying to seek refuge in those parts of the country that are not yet touched by the conflict. For these reasons, on the 4th of March last week, exactly last week, jointly with Vice President Timmermans and Commissioner Avramopoulos, we have steered inside the Commission the process that will lead to the adoption of a new EU agenda for migration. It was foreseen to come later in the summit, in the summer, if not later. I have personally asked this to be anticipated in May, because we cannot really wait other months to act, and to act together and efficiently. It will be built on 4 main objectives: an effective asylum policy, well-managed regular migration, the fight against irregular migration, and the protection of our common external borders. In this framework, I have decided to put, as I told you, migration on the agenda of the next Foreign Affairs Council on Monday, where foreign ministers will have, for the first time, a discussion to complement the ongoing work of the Justice and Home Affairs Council that is taking place in these hours. Together with Commissioner Avramopoulos, I have written to the ministers to share some ideas already in these days on how we could step up our concrete action in the external dimension of our effort on migration in order to avoid tragedies at sea, but also at land borders, securing protection of those in need, and fighting against criminal networks controlling the trafficking and smuggling. And let me also say we have also started to exchange views with the UNHCR and with the High Commissioner Guterres on the most effective measures and policies to face these challenges together. It has to be a joint effort, starting from the very helpful and useful experience that the UNHCR has developed over these years. I proposed to the ministers to discuss along 3 strands. 1, enhanced cooperation with third countries of origin and transit on the West African migratory route, the East African one, and the so-called Silk Route, in order to build capacities to fight against smuggling and trafficking networks and protect stranded migrants in distress. Second, step up refugee protection both in countries of origin and in neighbouring countries where asylum seekers and refugees have settled, using resettlement and humanitarian admission schemes and regional development and protection programmes in order to assist partner countries to become robust providers of effective protection in accordance with international law, as well as to provide safe alternatives to dangerous journeys. And 3, engage with our partners in third countries of origin on the potential of regular, well-managed migration. We should consider better targeted mobility partnerships as an instrument for economic and social development, accompanied by a reflection on the role of remittances in development and on the mutual recognition of educational and professional qualifications, because we know very well when people have regulated and safe ways that works better not only for themselves. We are talking about persons, first of all. We just finished a debate on human rights, let's remember that. But we are also talking about development of their countries of origin and also of our own societies in the European Union. Now, these are things we need to do, both in the short and in the long term, when it comes to external action of our commitment to a better management of migration. But we all know, and here I call back to Libya, our starting point, we all know that Libya is the immediate key element for facing the dramatic situation of people dying at sea, and also to face the security, the stability challenge we have very close to our borders. We all know, and I can guarantee you all Member States and all Commissioners know, here I play my double role, that Libya is the #1 issue we need to face in these weeks if we want to be sure that the European Union can have a stable and secure future, and our region can have a stable and secure future. The impact of this continued situation in Libya on not only our sea and our European Union, but also on neighbouring countries that are struggling themselves with difficult transitions, could be really explosive. So I am looking forward to listening to your views in this respect, that I will be happy to report also to the ministers. But let me send from here a strong message in view of what is happening in these days in Rabat. all parties need to be fully aware of the fact that from the European Union will come all possible support, also on the security level, but we need to have them taking the first step and unite for saving the country.
Thank you very much for your statement, and I would like to give the floor to the main speakers of the various political groups. Madam Metsola, on behalf of EPP, takes the floor now, if you please, in 1 minute 30 seconds.
Grazie, Signora President. Nixtieq nibda billi nirringrazzja lil kollegi.
Thank you very much. I wish to thank all the colleagues who have agreed on having this discussion today. Today, there are a number of linked issues at play in Libya today. The different factions in Libya have not yet agreed on a unity government. We appreciate any type of dialogue. However, we agree that there is a lack of security in the country. This means that Islamic groups, terror groups like the Islamic State are gaining a foothold in the country. These terrorist organizations can only be effectively defeated by a strong and united Libya. It is the Libyans themselves, as you said, Madam Vice President, the Libyans themselves must be the masters of their own destiny. As the King of Jordan underlined yesterday, we would be wrong to see the fight against ISIS as a fight between religions. ISIS is not representative of Islam. This is a fight against extremists who abuse of religion. The situation in Libya is evolving fast. Thousands of people are at risk of being displaced. They will flee the terror and violence in any way they can. Migratory flows will continue to persist. Immediately after the overthrow of Gaddafi, the EU, and particularly Malta and Italy, witnessed an influx of thousands. We need to be prepared. We need to think outside the box and have the courage to look at every instrument available that the European Union can use. This includes looking at whether it is time to deploy assets to the Mediterranean to save lives and to boost security, or to see how we could use the directive on temporary protection by the EU. Finally, I welcome the fact that this issue will soon be discussed at the European Council. We need to keep the issue at the top of the EU's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the S&D Group, Madam Anna Gomes, please, in 2 minutes.
Signora Mogherini.
Ms. Mogherini, you're right. Libya should be a priority for urgent action by EU governments. We're seeing an escalation of violence and sectarianism. It's turning into a quasi-Somalia on Europe's doorstep. The EU has to mobilize diplomacy, sanctions and other resources to back up Bernardino Leon and the UN and try to ensure a government of national unity can move forward. There are oil fields, there's World Heritage sites, and Ansar al-Sharia is active. There are many people who are leaving the coast of Libya, coming to the EU. The migratory flow cannot be combated by closing the door, but rather through the UNHCR and other refugee support schemes, managing the flows with solidarity from member states. Terrorism can find a way into Europe from Libya, and the biblical scale of the environmental disaster in Libya also constitutes a threat. So we need to intervene. We need to send an international mission approved by the Security Council to stabilize Libya and prevent terrorism spreading. The Security Council needs to draw upon the resources present in the field to ensure that governance, national security and regional security can be obtained. It needs to be a long-term plan with regional partners and the EU involvement. We need to ensure that following the fall of Gaddafi, that others do not come into that vacuum. It's our own responsibility and in our own interest to strengthen security, social integration of militias, protection of crucial infrastructure as part of a political strategy. Without that, we won't be able to ensure democratic governance.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Mr. DEMESMAEKER.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, during our January session, we just become aware of the fact that IS was present in Libya. And shortly thereafter, we witnessed the horrific scenes of the beheading of 21 Egyptian Copts. Since then, we've seen IS parading their wares around the coastal states of northern Africa, Libya in particular. One of my colleagues said in a Dutch newspaper that Libya had the potential to become a crisis which was infinitely more grave than Syria. From a European perspective, Libya is very important, arguably more so. There are lots of problems with illegal immigrants and Muslim extremists and fundamentalists, and many of these can be traced back to issues in Libya. That's food for thought. This country is becoming a hornet's nest of militias, and it's fertile ground indeed for IS. The people just do not need to be tyrannized by a minority, and therefore Europe has got to work with the Arab League and has got to give every bit of support it possibly can to the Libyan people who desperately need it. And it is only possible for us to help them the way they need if we have an inclusive peace process.
Thank you. On behalf of ALDE, MAURA BARANDIARÁN, please take the floor.
Thank you, President. Libya is no longer a state. It's a factional conflict, an internecine conflict. There's drugs trafficking and people trafficking, human trafficking. It's not about ideology or religion. It's not a civil war. It's rival gangs. And ISIS is spreading. It's been present in the country since the middle of last year. There are negotiations between the different groups, which is a very difficult, painful process, but IS wants to get to Tunisia, Algeria, wants to move across those porous southern borders. Terrorists and others want to get to where Boko Haram is so that they can join up with them. And as Libya collapses, this is something that can have far-reaching consequences right across the Sahel region. From Tunisia to Egypt, this could be a large-scale disaster. We need to be just as concerned about North Africa as we are about Eastern Europe. As the High Representative has said, we need to be prepared for the worst. What this means is we should go from words to action. We need to ensure there are border controls, effective border controls.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Madam Barbara Spinelli in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you very much indeed, President. The director of Frontex sowed fear around the European Union, saying that 1 million immigrants would be coming from Libya, including jihadists from IS. This in Europe was simply encouragement for the right and made people concerned about military intervention in Libya. But I'd like to ask you, do you share Mr. Avramopoulos' concern about cooperation with dictatorship, and what do you think about forced repatriation? Bernardino Leon has ideas about creating a naval blockade along the Libyan coast. What do you think of this idea? Any sort of intervention in Libya would be worse than the American intervention in Afghanistan. We would be intervening in areas which are chaotic from the geopolitical point of view, and we would simply be expounding the chaos that we created with our initial intervention. I think that legal humanitarian corridors are an absolute prerequisite for the action that you have suggested. And I think from a political point of view, it's absolutely essential that we try to end the war between factions there and try to recognize that we shouldn't be sowing fear without real cause to do so, that we should be trying to encourage democracy. And I don't know that if there is any reason for insisting on if there is no reason for insisting on the...
Thank you. On behalf of the Greens, Barbara Lochbihler, please take the floor in 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam President and High Representative Mrs. Mogherini. Libya is at a crossroads. Either it's going to go along the road of UN-supported dialogue and towards unity, or the country will sink further into chaos. And we have to assume that the radical forces in Libya will continue to gain influence. I think it is to be feared that the jihadist groups in particular will continue their armed conflict and profit from it. Given this threat, it is clear that there is no alternative to a negotiated solution which the Libyans themselves must bring about. The international community can support that process, for example, through continuing the upholding of the UN weapons embargo, and the EU must stand up against a military intervention also by states within the region. And those states should be supported in this region which try to bring about a dialogue, Tunisia and Algeria in particular. Finally, I would like to stress that a sustainable long-term solution to the Libyan problem with the violations of human rights and other violations must be brought about in line with our resolution, and we must ensure that the crimes before and after the fall of the Gaddafi regime are brought to book. There should be a special committee of inquiry set up, supported by the UN, and the International Criminal Court must be able to make necessary resources available to ensure that the cases referred to it by the UN are prosecuted. I'd like to finish by thanking you, High Representative, for your constant and intensive engagement in this conflict.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Mr. Castaldo in 1 minute.
Thank you, President. A few months ago, Libya was being described as a Pandora's box, but things have changed since then, and we are beginning to see some fruit and possibly a government of national unity. Now we have to be extra vigilant and not make a false move. We should not fall into General Haftar's trap, calling for the arms embargo to be lifted. The Czech Republic, Serbia, Ukraine, with 125 pieces of military equipment. The danger is that Ansar al-Sharia and ISIS can get their hands on military equipment material which is moving through the country, and that will worsen the chaos. We need to ensure that all factions are aware that there is no military option, and it's only up to people putting forward a national unity government.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Buonanno, please take the floor in 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I'd like to show the flag, fly the flag for Libya here, because I have been to Libya. Unlike those of you who've been speaking so far, I've been in Libya and I came back only this morning, and I can tell you what I saw there is not what I've been hearing about here. For example, the High Representative is talking to a Turkish minister. Well, does she know that Turkey is actually one of the countries that's financing the terrorists in Libya? Do you know, or don't you know? Do you know that that Qatar is financing the terrorists in Libya? Do you know that Saudi Arabia is likewise? The Libyans and the government in Tobruk, which is where I was, there's a naval base there, there's a parliament there with 23 members of parliament, and there are women amongst them. They said that they haven't seen a Western person for a year. There hasn't been a Western politician going to Libya for a year. And here we're talking about Libya without having the faintest idea what's going on there. You're talking about lifting the embargo, but if you don't, then their hands are tied, and the Islamic terrorists just do what they want. Islamic Brotherhood. There are illegal immigrants arriving on our shores. There may be or there may not be in those numbers, but really and truly, you've got to go to Libya and see what is going there. Mogherini, come with me the next time. I went, I paid for my own trip. Come with me the next time.
Thank you for your intervention. And now we move to the independent MEPs. Madame Gabriel, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. The resolution of the Libyan crisis is a priority. In fact, it's an urgent priority, and we're all directly affected. And this is why we need a strategy that is up to the mark. Yes, we must continue to support the negotiation process that has been conducted under the UN aegis to bring about a political solution to the crisis, but we must also pursue this through diplomatic channels and find levers that allow us to move forward for all parties against Daesh's expansion. 2 comments here. All efforts, I think, are moving in the same direction, and the countries in the region are also need to show leadership. Secondly, we perhaps ought to think about a plan B, whereby we could exert influence in this process, because what if the talks lead nowhere? And this is a question that we need to have sufficient courage to ask ourselves. Finally, the reconciliation, because we have to have a national level agreement, but we must bring about reconciliation at a local level. That's for mayors and local elected representatives. We must involve women fully, and Libyan women will help bring about peace for future generations. And finally, the European Union can make a difference in managing the consequences of this crisis and face up to the humanitarian situation, fully supporting those countries that are hosting refugees. This is what is expected of us, because at the end of the day, if we look ahead, we can plan for what will come down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Mr. BOŠTINARU. In 1 minute, please take the floor.
No, it's okay.
It's okay, yes.
Madam President, Madam High Representative, I will start by saying that the theater is not the solution of Libya. Definitely not, and we shall refrain ourselves and others as well by playing theater in trying to expose the Libyan crisis. Time passes, and while we don't have yet good news from Libya, we see that the threat of Daesh increasing, with attacks conducted on the Libyan territory, including the beheadings of 21 Egyptian Christian Copts, and with the official affiliation of Boko Haram to Daesh. It is already a fact which heavily increase the danger for the region. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Libyans are crossing the Mediterranean. In Libya, the institution building is the key problem, and here Europe should play a key role together with the regional and international partners. I am very much encouraged by the conflicting sides finally negotiated face-to-face in Morocco, because a unity government which controls the entire country is very necessary, is the most important step. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tannock, please take the floor in 1 minute.
Madam President, this House 2 months ago discussed the crisis in Libya. At that time, the peace talks were between the 2 main factions and being brokered by the UN in Geneva under the auspices of Bernardino Leon as Special Representative. Since then, ISIS has strengthened their position in Sirte, from where they have launched attacks against the Copts, murdering 21 men by beheading, and most recently ISIS have destroyed an oil facility in Al-Ghari, where another 8 Libyans were killed and some foreign nationals. 9 of them were kidnapped, including 2 EU citizens. The previous peace talks have broken down now, and the fresh round of EU-funded talks scheduled for Rabat in Morocco look set to be delayed at the request of the internationally recognised government in Tobruk. Allowing Libya to fall into chaos will result in it becoming a failed state and a safe haven for jihadi terrorism very close to our own borders, and not only jeopardising our security on our continent, but also there will be a massive influx of refugees across the Mediterranean. Member States need to look more seriously and closely now at a UN-mandated restarting of military options and to support our regional allies such as Egypt in containing this terrible problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Vergiat, in 1 minute, please.
I would like to focus on the consequences of the situation in Libya on EU immigration policy. If I heard the interpretation to immigration, there were over 170,000 illegal border crossings in 2013, according to Frontex, which is more than in 2011. And this is one of, if not the main, border passages to Europe. Because of the lack of controls in Libya, but also because of the way EU borders are being strengthened, our external borders. So there are men, women and children fleeing conflict and repression, fleeing terrible situations. They may be Syrian, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Sudanese, potential asylum seekers. They are in states where there are dictators, where we could deal upstream and avoid people trafficking that affects 16 states. I'll end with a question, Madam President. Are you truly negotiating with these states in the context of the Khartoum?
Thank you very much. Madam Sargentini, in 1 minute, please take the floor.
Dank u, voorzitter. Laat ik dan verder gaan waar me...
Thank you. Let me carry on where Ms. Vergier left off and ask you, what are you actually doing in the negotiations of the Khartoum process, cooperation between the European countries and the countries in Africa, where there are a lot of dictatorships involved? This question is a very complex one. But what are you actually doing, and what have you set yourself as outcomes when you have negotiations amongst the foreign ministers and when the ministers of domestic and internal affairs meet? Because surely your intentions must be to try to reduce the level of tension in Libya and scale down the number of refugees and asylum seekers. But at the moment, the member states haven't actually been prepared to do anything about helping to try to resolve this crisis. And I don't see any greater signs of unity between the northern and southern European countries at all, because the system is the Italians have got to try to rescue the people, and they can just keep them. The rest of us won't bother.
Madam Atkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Libya has ceased to be a state thanks to the civil war that the EU helped to create. You say you want dialogue, but which set of terrorists will you be talking to? The West intervened in Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya, and the result? Migration on an unprecedented scale, leading to the most disgusting of human trade, people trafficking. The EU's porous borders and unchecked travel in the Schengen area has led to the Calais crisis. Our own Prime Minister offers the French £12 million of British taxpayers' money to help alleviate the Calais crisis. Yet to do what? I've asked Mr Cameron the question, but I've received no reply to my letter of the 17th of January. I fear your lack of border controls will be responsible for the next ISIS attack and on British soil, directly as a result of intervention in Libya, which is now lawless and is a fertile recruitment ground for exporting more terrorism caused by the West. The King of Jordan said in this place yesterday that the Middle East problem is a regional one, and I agree with him. Let's hope you all do too.
Thank you very much. Mr. Elmar Brok, in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
High Representative, this is one of those cases where we are at a loss. We have had groups that were prepared to resort to violence but are not prepared to step in because they cannot see what's to be achieved. And I think we need to ensure that the groups that want to bring about a solution can be supported by our actions, and it seems to me that we can do that. I think that our reaction vis-à-vis the Coptic Christians is right. Now, this is going to impact on the refugee situation, and since the 1st of January, there have been 9,500 refugees that have attempted to cross the Mediterranean, 70% more than last year. And we see the cold-hearted approach of the traffickers who force them on with Kalashnikovs, and I think we perhaps need to patrol closer to the coast to ensure that they cannot keep doing this and cause further fatalities. Of course, it does depend on a ceasefire and the protection of important infrastructure. All of that plays a role too. We know that, but we need to ensure that the refugee situation is one where human lives are at the center, and I think we need to get closer to the coasts and do better than we have in recent times in order to protect these refugees.
Thank you. Mr. Panzeri, 1 minute.
Grazie.
Thank you. In the light of recent developments in the situation in Libya, the opportunities for a peaceful resolution of the crisis through a political dialogue does seem to be possible. Without a political dialogue, it will not be possible to meet the challenge of terrorism, which is not only a threat to the people of Libya, peace and stability in Libya, it's also a threat for the entire region. I would say to Mr. Buonanno that if we lift the embargo, that just risks increasing hostilities, and there's no guarantee of a military victory. In fact, what we need to do is show to the parties that the international community wants to help Libya create an independent technocratic government of national unity, which is the only solution to the Libyan crisis and the necessary institutional first step to give a response to terrorism and immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Bashir. 1 minute.
High Representative, Libya used to be one of the Arab world's wealthiest countries. Nearly 4 years after the fall of the Gaddafi regime, the nation lies in ruins. A power struggle has torn the country apart as rival groups viciously fight to gain control of Libya's vast resources. The energy industry, which was supposed to be the cornerstone of Libya's recovery and a success story of the Arab Spring, oil revenue levels are critically low and could bankrupt the government. There are reports that up to 1 million migrants are ready to head towards Europe. This could cause a humanitarian disaster of unprecedented proportions. UN brokered discussions surrounding a unity government is good news. Nevertheless, a lasting outcome will require concessions, patience and, most significantly, Libyan solutions to Libyan problems.
Thank you. The next speaker will be Madam Konečná in 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, last week the terrorists have kidnapped a group of Asian and European workers, and their only fault was working in this country. One Austrian and Czech member had only the fault of belonging to Western civilization. So we faced murders and kidnappings of civilians, not just in Libya. It's a result of bombardment in 2011, which got rid of a brutal regime but also destroyed bases of the state. and it was only the use of brutal force. The result is chaos, growing social instability, and a wave of refugees on the way to the EU. This is reaping the fruit of the policies which consists only in killing and destruction. They lack the ability to bring the country to development. This is our business card. So instead of vain talk, really doing something, because people are dying on the other side of the sea.
Thank you. Mr. Batten, 1 minute.
To call the situation in Libya unstable is understatement, to say the least. The situation is complete and utter chaos with no foreseeable solutions and only dire consequences. Colonel Gaddafi richly deserved his fate, but the intervention of Britain and France was done without thought for the consequences. The West started out by supporting Gaddafi's opponents, only to find that what replaced him is even more savage and barbaric. The moral of the story is that Britain should not get involved in military adventures unless it is clearly in our national interest, has a clearly identified military objective, and there is some idea of what the outcome and the unforeseen consequences might be. Instead, we allowed ourselves to get sucked into a piece of EU foreign policy vanity that has unleashed a vision of hell in the shape of armed and unrestrained Islamic extremists who know no moral or humanitarian restraints.
The next speaker will be Barbara Matera.
Thank you very much, President. Colleagues, High Representative, it's 3 years since the fall of Gaddafi, but Libya is far from a stable country. There are two governments there. There are dozens of rival tribes. There are dozens of militias, factions, all engaged in fratricide and worse. ISIS has now taken foot there and is perpetrating horrific crimes against humanity there, which we've already seen in Iraq and Syria. The international is to be unsure what to do. On one hand, it's aware of the need to react, but it's terrified to do so, and at the same time it's simply playing into the hands of the extremists in the Mediterranean. The government in Tobruk needs to compromise with the Tripoli government, and the European Union is going to have to give some kind of reliable support to the country, because otherwise the country is going to end up in the hands of IS, and there's going to be even more people trafficking, and we're going to be facing even worse phenomena than we do already, which is immigration and Islamist extremism, all in a cauldron and of a very explosive mixture, which is going to be extremely dangerous for all our citizens. Europe has really got to have a good think about where it ought to be in this whole business, and it really ought to come up with a better strategy which is going to help to establish a state of law. I think, High Representative, it's time that we showed that European democracy, European diplomacy can actually be incisive. It can actually come up with clear, specific initiatives. Specific measures out with this chamber are possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weidenholzer, in 1 minute.
Thank you very much. There were times when you might have said that these conflicts wouldn't affect you at home, but now the situation in Libya is proving that not to be the case, because just at the weekend the Al Ghani oil field was set on fire and foreign workers were captured, and we don't know what their fate is. People are back at home are concerned about this for obvious reasons, and we need to stop these terrorists, needing the full panoply of measures, and we will only be able to conquer them if we show no compromise. And in Europe and in those countries where they exercise their control, we must do whatever we can to ensure that we bring back the rule of state and the law in Libya, and we must waste no time in so doing.
Thank you. Mr. Corrao is not in the room as far as I can see, so Mr. Diaz de Mera, please, in 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Gracias, señora.
Thank you. It's a failed state, a possible breeding ground for ISIS. So we need to support Bernardino Leon and Federica Mogherini. We need to support the idea of a government of national unity. We've seen the barbarity of IS, we've seen the destruction of cultural heritage, we've seen mass displacements of persons, people fleeing danger and crossing the Mediterranean. We can't stop them trying to leave, can we, Ms. Mogherini? So what are we going to do about this reality? We need a political solution, a joint solution, showing solidarity. We need to cooperate with third countries in the context of development aid, humanitarian assistance, security policy, facilitating legal escape for people who are fleeing for their lives. Community resettlement, showing solidarity, granting asylum in Europe and treating all member states equally. We need to show determination in combating those criminals who are trading in human lives. Europol, Eurojust, Frontex and EASO have shown that there are limits to budgets and limits to coordination across EU territory, and we need to bolster that cooperation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stier. In 1 minute and 30 seconds. Please take the floor.
Gospođo predsjednice, već gotovo čitavo desetljeće centralni Mediteran je jedna od glavnih ruta ilegalnog.
Thank you. For a decade now, the Mediterranean has been one of the entrance channels or routes for many migrants coming into the European Union. In 2015, we anticipate that some 500,000 refugees will come to our shores, most of them coming from Libya. Many of them, sadly, will lose their lives along the way, as has been the case year on year for the last decade. People are being saved at sea in very limited numbers, and many, many more are losing their lives. Frontex just doesn't have the funding or the equipment to do what it needs to do, so we need to look at the source of the problem and try to tackle it there. Libya is divided in two. There's two governments, one in Tobruk, one in Tripoli. ISIS is taking root there. We really need to take action under the auspices of the UN, and I welcome the programme that has been put forward by the High Representative, because I do feel that this could contribute to a longer term strategy for a solution, and that's the only way that we can actually put an end to radicalization and fundamentalism. We've got to help to try to build the necessary institutions in Libya. Since the fall of Gaddafi, sadly, we've just lost our way there, and we've forgotten that we were supposed to be.
Thank you. May I inform all my fellow MEPs that we have come to the end of the independent speeches, and we move to the Catch the Eye stage. Madam Dalli, please take the floor.
Grazie, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. We need to stop the instability in Libya, because this is the only way we can ensure stability in the Mediterranean and in the European Union. We must stop this, even for the millions of innocent people in Libya who believed that they could have a new start 3 years ago. The situation at present is leading to the fact that many people are trying to cross the Mediterranean. And if the countries that have this problem of immigration are going to be ignored, the Mediterranean and the whole of Europe will suffer serious repercussions. We need to found a new task force, a diplomatic task force, European, that should consider any situation, any potential situation, and at the same time it would lead to a plan to give us a possible scenario. This task force should be under you, Ms. Mogherini. We need to have preventive measures to ensure that the situation doesn't worsen, and it should stabilize itself with planning, serious planning. We need to have a government of national unity in Libya. The situation in Libya and the Mediterranean cannot be ignored anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Monika HOHLMEIER, please.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
President, colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the floor once again. The situation in Libya and what we can expect once the winter storms are over on the Mediterranean, that's a situation we cannot predict. There are a lot of people who don't choose to get on these dilapidated boats. They're forced to do so. So the question arises as to which specific measures do you want to implement to ensure that as of the spring there aren't going to be thousands of people dying because they don't reach the Mediterranean coast? How can we prevent the boats actually leaving? And how can we reach an agreement to find some kind of legal measures up to returns if necessary, but to prevent these mass deaths?
Κυρία Πρόεδρε, η κατάσταση στη Λιβύη πρέπει να μας οδηγήσει όλους στο συμπέρασμα ότι...
Well, if you look at the situation in Libya, we have to conclude that, generally speaking, we are getting into chaos. It looks as though the state has been dissolved. There's a question of survival, and there's a lot of arms trading. And Boko Haram is winning, getting more and more influence. And there have been streams of refugees coming to the European Union. So it's a real challenge for us. It can only be settled on the basis of peace. So we have to support negotiations in that region so that we can settle it peacefully. As Turkey perhaps mediating, I don't know. Is it possible, yes or no? What can the European Union do by way of taking measures against these countries? In Syria, they're very close to Turkey.
Yes, there, Mr. Yevkovskich.
Please, micro.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Poštovana gospođo
Madam High Representative, Madam President, I'm not a pessimist by nature. I'm actually rather an optimist, but in this particular case, it seems to me that we are running out of time. I am actually afraid that these 3 years during which we have been hoping that the Libyan people will finally get control over their country after this horrible regime had been toppled, unfortunately haven't really yielded the results that we were hoping. The government of national unity is obviously the only solution that can be agreed upon in order to make sure that the criminals that are killing people in such great numbers are finally stopped. I especially support your ambition to talk to regional and local authorities. I have had certain experience in this particular field, and I find that this strategy of yours is a good one. Thank you.
Mr. Khan, képviselő úrnak adom meg a szót.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by thanking our High Representative Federica Mogherini for the excellent work that she is doing. And I think it is important for us to understand that the European Union does have a critical and important role to play in the world stage. And it's good to see under her leadership that we are getting better and better at this. A number of my colleagues have touched on the difficulties that we are facing in Libya and the dangers that we expose ourselves to this. And we need to be making sure that actually we work towards finding the resolution. And I know that a lot of good points have been covered. I just want to say 3 things that I think we need to be looking at. The first is, with the breakdown of the state government in Libya, there are ordinary civilian people who are actually suffering. There are actually shortage on the food, shortage on medicine, etc. So we need to help them on that front. We need to work on the idea of non-interference from other states, and we need to work for reconciliation and for a national unity government. Thank you.
Köszönöm, képviselő úr. Tájékoztatom képviselőtársaimat, hogy a KSDI eljárás.
Now, I would like to inform the members that the Catch the Eye procedure is closed now. There were a lot of questions and opinions in this very complex issue. There are all sorts of different positions, but I'll give the floor back to Mrs. Mogherini. I'm going to reply in Italian. I have to say that I agree with what's been said by one of you, where you talked about an unstable situation in Libya. That's a euphemism. Similarly, it's a euphemism to refer to a failed state. We're basically not dealing with a state at all, and that's the main problem that we have to grapple with. Furthermore, the issue is the complexity of all the problems that we're facing in Libya. And as many of you have said, and as I said myself at the opening, this is one of the most dramatic crises that we're facing close to us. And there are many different levels of problems, interconnected problems. Some of those relate to security, not only with respect to the Libyan territory, where we can see not only that there's a greater presence of terrorist groups and organizations, but also a real use of franchising of Daesh to different militant groups, but also connected to other crises, those connected to the south, the connection with Boko Haram, as we've heard, but also connected to the crisis in Syria and Iraq, and the arrival of foreign fighters coming from other areas of conflict and arriving back in Libya. There are potentially devastating consequences for the neighbouring countries. For example, Tunisia. That's one of the countries that quite rightly we describe as a success story of the democratic transitions in the region. But there's huge pressure bearing down on their borders in humanitarian and security terms. So, as I was saying, it's a security issue, migration issue, human trafficking, an issue of energy and financial resources in a country that's potentially very rich, so it wouldn't need, as it didn't need in the past, to count on any international support. But clearly, as things stand, the people are suffering a terrible humanitarian situation, and here too the EU is doing a great deal and prepared to do even more. And then there's another level, namely the consequences on neighbouring countries, Tunisia, but also Egypt, Algeria, but also the EU, and also the southern countries, sub-Saharan countries. And the consequences not only in terms of security issues and immigration, but also with respect to the regional political issues. Now, we know one of the problems isn't just the total collapse of Libya and a potential division of the country, but also the risk of a proxy war on Libya, in Libya, on the part of other regional powers or the extended region. So, with that in mind, it's very clear to all Libyans, and I hope it's clear to all of us, that there's no possible military option with respect to what we're facing. And if anyone's tempted by the approach of simply wanting intervention when there's a crisis, that would be overlooking the complexity that I've just sketched out, with a huge territory and very complex social structure, and also the absence of any state structures. So with respect to such a complex problem, we cannot respond with any panacea. There's simply no magic wand with this crisis, as is the case with other crises, but even less so here. There's no military option, and I think we should be aware of that. There's no Libyan military option. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the EU shouldn't be concerned and actually have a responsibility with respect to certain actions. Now, unfortunately, the colleague who put the question to me has left, and I hope that my words will be conveyed to her. Now, obviously, she hadn't heard what I said at the beginning. Now, in terms of specific actions, the EU is one of the main supporters, and indeed we're pushing forward the actions in Libya, namely dialogue, the Rabat political dialogue, but as I said, the situation is so complex that we do have to proceed on dialogue. There's dialogue in Tripoli and Morocco. The Tripoli dialogue obviously is rather tempered. I was there a few months ago, and Brok has mentioned this now. I met Bonino in Tripoli as well, and there are also counterparts on the other side. Now, someone has suggested we reinforce the dialogue, and then there's also been women calling for men to come and sit around the negotiating table. They're fed up with losing their resources. Now, dialogue with the Libyans, dialogue with the UN. We had a discussion with Ban Ki-moon a few days ago on Libya, also with the Arab League and other regional players. Now, I've discussed this with the Secretary General of the Arab League, also the Foreign Minister of Egypt, as soon as I leave this 6-hour plenary. But European actions also means that we need to consider options that are timely and that have to be carried out at the right time. If we get the timing wrong in this crisis, it could have fatal consequences, as we've seen very clearly in the last few months and years. This means that we have to prepare, for example, not only border controls, but also a rational management of migratory flows and asylum seekers together with the UNHCR, also protection of the basic infrastructure of the country with a view to a future government, but also communication infrastructure, airport links. It means we have to work on measures that will allow us to monitor a ceasefire once that's in place. So the Libyans know very well that the EU is working very hard in the last few days and weeks, not only through diplomatic channels, but also with respect to the specific measures and tools that will make available to a future government to ensure that the national unity government, not foreign military intervention, the national unity government will be able to meet the challenges of rebuilding its country, security and migratory flows, or the challenges that it's facing. Now, another challenge that's been flagged up isn't only to be prepared with all these different tools, but also to work on the basis of unity across the board of our 28 member states, because any decision will need that. Clearly it's not an easy process, but I think in the light of the dramatic situation, it means that we all have to face this emergency, all 28 member states. It means we all have to be able to take decisions together if and when they're necessary, and it means that altogether all 28 of us have to be prepared to show greater solidarity when it comes to receiving migrants. This is one of the issues that are raised with the Commission. The Home Affairs Ministers are currently discussing it in their Council, and the Foreign Affairs Ministers are also going to be discussing this on Monday. I've been asked what we're doing with respect to the Khartoum process. That was launched at the end of November under the Italian presidency in Rome. I was present at that meeting, and I think it can provide many tools for us. Obviously 3 months isn't enough to take stock yet of what's been done. However, we have various tools on the table, namely greater cooperation with countries in the Khartoum process, not only when it comes to border management, but also a human rights-based approach to manage migratory flows, and joint work on capacity building in these countries that need to meet these challenges for them, of course, first and foremost. I believe that I've covered most of the issues that were raised, but to conclude, let me say that At the moment, quite rightly, we're focusing on the emergency and the fact that we're facing a security and a human rights challenge, as well as the risk of a large country imploding close to the EU. We'd be making a mistake if amongst the specific actions we're working on in the next few days, we didn't also include the clear, firm support that the EU can give, namely institution building. What we're facing is the absence of any succession or any success in building institutions. That's what's been lacking in the past up to now, and that's got to be our focus in our partnership with the Libyan authorities in the future. So that's going to be the crucial area. Libya is not economically weak. Libya has huge potential, and what the EU can do apart from security, migratory flows, border controls, and building a constructive regional area is institution building. We're not going to be able to meet the challenges faced by Libya if we don't help build democratic institutions that are responsible for the whole of the Libyan territory, responsible for managing the lives of all Libyan, wherever they're from. Thank you.
Köszönöm a főképviselő asszonynak a záró gondolatait.
Thank you very much to the High Representative for sharing those thoughts. So that brings this point to an end, and now we move on to the next point on the agenda. And this is a report from the European Commission and the High Representative on the Mali peace agreement. So, in other words, I would like to give the floor to Kalina Lubchevska, Minister, who is responsible for the area.
Yeah, it's working. Madam President, honourable members, on behalf of the HRVP, I'm very glad that the European Parliament has still a keen interest for the situation in Mali, as the European Union deployed considerable efforts in support of peace, democracy and development in the country over the years. We are all saddened by the recent attack in Bamako on the 7th of March, which cost lives of several people, including a Belgian security officer of the EU delegation. There is a real risk that increased terrorist activity will derail the political process, which is currently at a turning point. All should join efforts to make sure that this will not happen. The United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, in particular, should be given the appropriate means to accomplish its mandate. The EU condemned the continuous attacks against the United Nations forces, such as recently in Kidal on the 8th of March. As you know, the European Union contributed to reaching a peace agreement in Algiers on the 1st of March. It acted as co-mediator together with the United Nations and the African Union, the Organization of the Islamic Conference, the Economic Community of West African States and 5 neighbouring countries. The European Union Special Representative was personally involved in the talks. It required substantial efforts to reach a compromise between the parties respecting of unity and integrity of Mali. The accord foresees further devolution of economic competences and resources to local authorities and the creation of local police forces. Regions should be better represented in the central institutions. The Malian army will be reformed to integrate ex-rebels in its ranks and will then be progressively redeployed over the whole territory under the UN MINUSMA supervision. The immediate challenge for us is to obtain endorsement of the agreement by the coordination. The European External Action Service is currently taking part in a joint mission on the ground to support this process and to convince the different stakeholders that there is no other credible alternative. It is now important for the government to demonstrate its commitment to the agreement by taking swiftly some of the actions it has undertaken to deliver. The EU will play